Hi. Before going to video, please subscribe to my channel for more interesting stuff. And the question is, ex-prisoners, what was the scariest thing you saw on the inside?
The living conditions. Toilets back up regularly and spew raw sewage into your tiny 12-cell with severely limited ventilation. Dried blood, shit, and boogers on the walls inches from where you lay your head to sleep. Clothes and sheets will have all manner of stains from bodily fluids. Mold everywhere, especially communal areas like showers. I know a guy who spent some years in a number of different prisons. He said that at one of them the cockroaches were so bad that he would plug his ears with toilet paper at night so they didn't crawl in his ears. I don't know if they actually would crawl in someone's ears or if he was just being paranoid, but in either case shivers, and he didn't sleep under anything, just on top of his clothes. The worst I heard was literal hell. I knew of someone who was in a prison in Arizona for about 6 years. He said the worst thing that happened was that for a whole 10 days or so the entire facility lost all of its power. No backup generators were working or anything. This was in the summer. It easily got up to 110 degrees inside the buildings after a couple of hours. The guy told me they knew of several older criminals who died from heat strokes and the facility passed on their deaths as if it was just purely from old age or stress. He also said all the guards and other workers either left work early or didn't even come into work as all the criminals were truly too overheated to try anything with one another. Lots of people with missing teeth. Also lots of people with black eyes or other bruises from getting into fights with cops or inmates. It surprised me the lengths people will go to get high. Swallow sleeping meds in front of the nurse, then throw it up 30 seconds later to sell. Same with methadone or any other drug you get. Also lots of PPL have hepatitis or other diseases you get from sharing needles. So be careful about stains on towels. Once when being given a little piece of cannabis by another prisoner, he pulled out a full-size surgical scalpel to cut me a little bit off. This shook me a bit as I was a technician in the arts department at the time and those items were regulated under lock and key. There was only 2 of those in the entire art department and they were checked twice a day at lunch and home time, and if they weren't there accounted for no one would be able to leave and the whole building would go into lockdown, which had only happened once or twice in my whole time there. Just a dangerous tool to be on the wing really with nearly 100 men. My cellmate had a bag filled with hooch. It began to fall off the desk in the cell. We all spotted it at once, watching in horrified silence as it passed the point of no return and splat. Nothing was left but a mess on the floor. The horror, the horror. I saw a friend getting a thumb in his ass by a lifer that was known to have sex with other inmates. I was scared for him. I also saw the same lifer in a hit-for-hit with another large inmate. That was intense. Seen a whole dorm get pepper sprayed, many fights. I could go on and on. I saw a guy get wheeled down the hall in a chair and straitjacket after trying to kill himself. I was involved in at least 3 fights myself and should have been more. People are idiots. I became close with many men doing over 100 years while I was only doing 18 mo. In fact, my last day a guy doing 2 life terms invited me to play Xbox in his cell with him. Looking back, he could have been setting me up, then the other guys got cold feet. I saw a guy turn yellow from untreated Hep C and a homemade syringe that had been used and passed around for years be hooped into someone's ass. I didn't use it. I saw murders, rapists, armed robbers, absolutely anything you can think of. All in the same area, being normal human beings, not being mean or anger or causing problems. That is perhaps the largest misconception. Everyone is good. But sometimes the bad wins, and unfortunately that all we usually remember, because it is perceived to have the most obvious effects. But we just remember trauma more vividly so we can avoid later. Every day I feared my food was tampered with and didn't trust anyone. Even the guards. Drugs. Cell phones. Razor blades. Women getting pregnant. People losing their goddamn minds. Always try to keep on the correct path. Do the right thing and be mindful. Don't learn the hard way. My friends and I were playing some R6S a few years ago and we started joking about prolapses, or as we called them at the time, pink socks. One of their dads started talking about how his friend that was in prison once glanced in another inmate's cell and saw him frantically trying to get his anus back inside him. Never did hard time, but I was arrested a bunch of times. Mostly just overnights and courthouse sitting waiting for bail. I've seen cops beat the living shit out of people for no reason. I saw a cop stomp a guy unconscious, then threw him into the bullpen. When he woke up it was clear he had broken ribs. 4 hours that guy laid on the ground screaming in pain. I once served 2 days in an open detention center. It was just a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. The staff there encouraged the inmates to leave because they knew they'd be dead within a kilometer. It was middle of winter and they locked up our shoes. But the worst thing I think I've ever seen was a kid maybe 13 comes into the police station and spits right in the cop's face. They pepper sprayed him and cuffed his hands behind his back, then threw him into the cell. They didn't come back for 8 hours, 8 fucking hours. I was in juvie for a week for an assault charge. Not enough time to see the real action, but there were many fights. I know that doesn't sound scary, but I grew up in a family that would fight physically all the time, and after they were finished, I would have to clean up all the blood stained on the ground. I grew up in violent conditions, which made it scary because in there it felt like home. I was in there for fighting my own drunken dad. That shit was scary to me. Edit: juvie is not actually as bad as you might think. At least in San Antonio, it was quite fun. There was one time that all of us were joking about having a sandal war. That's all we could wear there, and we were all laughing. Then all of a sudden someone threw this heavy-ass sandal across the room, nailing someone right in the arm. Everyone dove behind their chairs and started chucking them at each other. When security came, everyone ran around and someone put a bag over a guard's head. That was one of the funniest shit that happened. Guy goes for scheduled surgery for cancer, in a local NHS hospital, under usual guarded escort. Has a tumor removed and lymph node and armpit cut out. Sent back to prison same day. The whole wing heard him screaming of the night. Turns out hospital had given him pain relief meds for prison nurses to administer, but on having possessions and body search on return to prison, security took away his pain relief as opiates are not allowed. This is torture. I can only imagine the agony of pain of post-cancer surgery and coming round back in your cell with no pain relief. They did allow him 2 paracetamol 3 times a day. Where and when did this barbaric crime take place? November 2014, HMP Park, Catby, Persione, Wales, UK. Civilized country, my ass. One guy was reputed to have drugs stuffed in his rectum. The leader of the Latinos told him he'd better get it out in a few hours or he'd have to drink shampoo until he shit the drugs out. Then the guy told him if he can't shit the dope out in a few hours, he's going in to get them. I interpreted that to mean he's actually going to probe this poor guy's ass with his bare hands, digging for the dope. I only ever in a juvenile detention facility, but from my experience I would never want to go back, and it was one of the worst experiences of my life. For a start, the toilets would regularly back up with other people's waste and would make your cell smell terrible. The food was terrible and sometimes I couldn't even tell what it was I was eating. The other kids in there with me were regulars and knew the guards and each other from past experiences, so I was the odd one out. Overall it was a terrible experience and regret my decisions that got me there. Toilets have fungi growing out of them. These fungi look like mini coral reefs of living organisms, I guess. You get staph infections from barely scraping your skin and the nurses will not treat you maybe until you even have a gaping hole, though multiple layers of epidermis. It will even eat into your muscle tissue if it doesn't heal on its own. They couldn't care less if you die. Anything can happen to you in there and there will be no help from anyone. No one cares. Even if you got charged and sentenced for being drunk in public, the sheriffs treat you like you're a rapist. I've seen a dozen inmates beat a guy so badly he was unconscious on the floor with blood pouring out of every orifice in his face, ears, eyes, etc. A pool of blood formed around him while the guards finished their coffees. A small Latino who didn't speak English had his arm broken by a guard who was too dumb to realize the Latino couldn't understand his English. Guard kept saying, "Are you being a smartass?" The Latino kept saying, "What?" Guard rips him out of holding tank and breaks his arm in front of a dozen witnesses. Guy emits non-stop, blood-curdling screams. Tossed back in cell. I could go on and on. I never went to prison or juvie for a sentence, but once I visited one of my friends who was locked up for drug possession, completely irrelevant to the story. I went to the mess room with him for lunch and I saw that the living conditions were almost disgusting, and the fact that he and many other teenage boys ate and cooked in that room is disgusting. Some kids even used to rub kids' faces in the mold. The rest of the juvie was fine though. Just the kitchen/cafe was sickening. Not me, but a relative of mine was in jail for about 2 to 3 days for some bullshit reason. The heat was unbearable. There was only one fan that was supposed to cool off over 24 people in one cell. The guards were incompetent and trigger happy. One guard shot himself on the leg trying to threaten someone. Friend got out. Surprise surprise, they couldn't find anything. They're also very corrupt, which isn't a surprise, but they did get a lot flack for supporting the release of a serial rapist. Not an ex-prisoner myself, but my best friend spent some time in an institution for troubled kids. Basically any young kids who experienced behavioral issues could be sent there, but I'm not entirely sure if it was private or if any of them were court-ordered. This was about 16 years ago when this occurred. For the record, My best friend is trans, so it may seem weird, but I'm going to be using the word she when at this time she was a boy. Just didn't want you thinking I was making a constant typo. Said there was a lot of rape and molestation going on. Usually the older boys doing it to the younger boys. They were all split up into groups based on age ranges, but in a lot of the common areas they'd all be together. During the day they'd be allowed to roam around the common areas, and the older boys would sometimes take a younger boy to the bathroom or some place where the cameras couldn't see. There were plenty of staff, but during the day they were usually not on patrol around the common areas. They were supervising stuff, so they didn't watch everything. Also, the boys who did most of this were there the longest, and knew how to sneak around unnoticed. She'd be going to therapy sessions and not be able to discuss why she was there, and then feel even more insecure because of what happened to her with the older boys.
Thanks for watching. Please do like, share, comment and subscribe for more videos.